everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Middle Manager Mastery Podcast with your host, Shruti Rustagi. Today, the guest that I have is super interesting. Now, she's led teams across 5 countries, risen to CFO at 2 global giants, and been named one of Forbes' top 100 most influential women. Today, she's here to share what 30 years of hard won leadership wisdom actually looks like from the inside. From the shop floors of India to the boardrooms of the Middle East, Shrimati Damal has navigated growth, crisis, and transformation at the highest levels. Now she's coaching the next generation of leaders, and she describes herself as imperfect but complete. What an amazing thought. I think we're going to love this conversation. Welcome to Middle Manager Mastery, Shrimati.
Thank you, Shruti, for inviting me and also for this lovely introduction.
Of course. All right, so let's get in. Now, Srimati, one of the topics that I've seen which really resonates with the middle managers who we are speaking to is executive presence, right? And sometimes it's like some people walk into the room and the energy shifts. So let me ask you, you've sat in boardrooms across 5 countries and different cultures. How did you adapt your leadership presence without losing your authentic self?
Shruti, for me, how I think about leadership presence is just an outwardly expression of the core leadership that you carry. So, one of the things that I've always tried to maintain through my career is to rely on my core strengths, which in my case was predominantly strategic thinking and solutions, and then adapt it externally to the environment by listening and observation. So
Okay.
that's the external focus that came in. So predominantly, that is the view that I've taken, that it's a combination of building on what your core strength is. So every time I would go into any discussion, it would be about preparing well, thinking through what the issue is, how's the business impacted, breaking it down, and then subsequently kind of think also about the stakeholders, who what issues would they have. So the biggest example that I have on this one in leadership presence is when I actually shifted first from India to Japan. In India, the culture was about fairly vociferous discussion in meetings. And then I carried the same style going into Japan, where it was a little different. It was a little bit quieter kind of a culture. And I thought my meetings were going extremely well because nobody was objecting. And I realized later on that wasn't the case at all. In fact, people not saying anything didn't mean necessarily that they agreed with me. It's just that they didn't really know how to object in a broader forum. So then I learned how to adapt it to kind of pre align with folks and handle it in a way that was culturally conscious. So this was one of the earliest examples. And subsequently, I've had to do this time and again. Every time I moved cultures, teams, the context changed. And you always kind of go back to what your core strength is, but always look to the external world to get some hints on how to be effective rather.
That's an interesting one. So, obviously, what you spoke about is like you start with who you are and your core strengths, and then do a lot of preparation, like you said. But then you said in the beginning 2 other things. You said listen in, and so which is basically getting maybe context conscious as well as read the room. And I think that's where I want to go a little bit next because that's a very interesting skill to develop as well as very much needed because not all meetings are going to be easy breezy. So there are going to be times when the odds are not in your favor. So let me ask you this. How would you command a room when people sitting there are not necessarily aligned and the odds are not in your favor?
Absolutely. Those are the tough ones. And it happens more and more in the middle management level. When you get to a senior level, you kind of have earned the stripes. So people are bound to listen to you and maybe at least will give you the time of day. right? In the middle management level, you are trying to make your point in a room which might actually have a very different point of view. So the first and the most important thing is it doesn't matter who else is in your corner. You have to be in your corner. You
Hmm.
have to come in from a place of conviction, from a place of confidence, and not from a place of self doubt and kind of vague thoughts. So, for me, this came through, again, preparation. I would always spend a lot of time ahead of a meeting thinking through what is it that I want to get out of this meeting. All right, who are the participants? How are they going to react? And in a way, during the meeting, I would actually not wait to say the hard stuff until the end because I might lose my nerve. Sometimes I would actually kind of face it head on to say, hey, this is the issue and this is what we're trying to resolve. I understand this is the concern. How do we go from here? Or this is my suggestion, how do we go from here? So it's almost like you have to take charge in a way. And at other times, it's quite possible that you are in a situation where you need the help of others. So, what I would do in that case is, as part of my preemptive work, I will pick one or two people who actually would be able to help me. So there was this
Hmm.
one instance when we had a very complicated financing deal, and the outcome was against what some of the senior leaders wanted. But I knew that was the right thing for the company. We had run through an RFP, and it would denote pretty badly if we kind of took a decision away from the RFP. It was not about that particular instance, it's about the principle that the company stood by. So I recollect this instance where I went to my CEO and said, this is going to be an unpopular decision. This is a big, large local bank. They are going to throw in some weight there and they may call the founder. This was enough. I need you to back me. This is what I'm thinking. And I need you to back me. And hey, God bless him. And he was there for me. And when the discussion became tough and there were a few people posturing, he was able to step in and say, hey, this is not going to work. This is the decision of the company, not this lady alone. So shamelessly use the help of other people when you need.
Very interesting. And I like to call that almost pre-wiring. So I agree with you. And pre-wiring, I have found, Srimati, works in many other situations too, like even internally. Like what you said was definitely a one which is a very, very high stakes situation because you're dealing with external entities. And like you said, they would throw their weight around and there was a lot of posturing. Even internally, I think sometimes we just have like these tough stakeholders. And so pre-wiring with some of them often is super helpful because then you've already heard where they would be coming from and what would be the concerns. As much as possible, if we can mitigate them either ahead or be clear with them, this is something that we'll have to work with, makes the meeting so much more productive. Yeah, I like
Absolutely.
that. I like that. And then let's come to a totally different dynamic. Sometimes the middle managers can also feel invisible in a room full of senior stakeholders. How can they shift that dynamic, you think?
Hmm. So I'm trying to go back in time and recollect how was my experience because then I can speak more truthfully and from the heart about it. And one of the earliest mistakes I have done is to think about my role as giving an update. All right.
Hmm.
When I would go into a meeting, I would say, okay, this is my work and I've done an amazing work and I'm going to give this as an update and share it with everybody. And then let the senior leaders kind of do the serious talking about the implications and who needs to get what resources, who's at odds with who somebody else. So then you kind of take a little bit of a low, kind of wallflower kind of a role. That's
Hmm.
something that I would tell people stay away from. Do not think about your role as just providing updates. Speak to the future. Whatever that the senior leaders are thinking about is something that you are capable also of thinking through. In fact, you're closer to the project, you know it much better, you know the connections that will drive any kind of friction. So go out there and talk about the risks, talk about the mitigation steps, talk about how you can make it bigger, talk about who else might be bothered by it. And suddenly now you are behaving like a leader yourself. And hell, nobody can not see you at that time, right? You are part of the senior leadership because you're solving that level of problems.
That is an excellent point. Yeah, and I agree, and I have been there too. There were projects that I ran, and I ran them as like just project managing, but not necessarily thinking of myself as the next level seniority. And
Right.
that shift makes so much of a difference because suddenly when you believe that you are at that level, you start operating at that level too. You start noticing those things, you start having those conversations. So I think that's such a great point. That first of all, you have to think of yourself as not somebody who's just there to give an update, but who's invested in it. Yeah. And that brings us to the second sort of the area that I want to touch base with you, which is strategic thinking. Because all of this cannot happen unless and until you are thinking big and you're thinking strategically about whatever the role may be, right? But the problem that I've seen is now when you think about this strata of middle managers, they are stuck between people who are just thinking strategy and people who are executing because they have to do sort of both. And in a very recent, so just in like literally 2 weeks ago, I wrapped up this 7 month long program I was running for an elevator manufacturer. They're one of the biggest in the world, and they're middle managers. And something that came up time and again was I would love to do strategic thinking, but I don't have the time for it, right? Because they are like so into their everyday work. So for most middle managers, they are too buried in execution to think strategically. How do you propose somebody even then starts, and what could be the mechanisms that could help them build that muscle?
Mm. So I actually believe that strategic thinking is something that you do right from day one. You don't have to
Hmm.
get to a level at all to start
Hmm.
doing it. I mean, even the day that you enter an organization, you understand what your job is. Somebody's told you. You kind of try and see how that links to the overall objective of the organization, of the company. Now, I was in a plant, right? I was doing cost accounting, so to say, at a plant. And if I had thought about my role as just accounting for stuff, then that's where I would have drawn the boundary. Instead, I was like, what am I trying to do? And what is the company trying to do? The company is trying to build shareholder value. It was at that time I was with Procter and Gamble, and TSR, total shareholder return, and being in the top one third is was a big thing. So it's
Hmm.
like, okay, so what I am doing is has to be linked to what this company is trying to achieve. And how is that possible? I was here working on wastages and reducing all of the variances, etc. The way I thought about it is variance is a wastage, and therefore it is erosion of shareholder return. Now let me think about what can I do to reduce that. Reducing that links that to the strategic objective of building shareholder value. Now, once I have decided that that is the scope of my role, now I know how to unravel it, right? I'll go behind, okay, what is the source of this wastage? Where is it coming from? Or what are the benchmarks? Can I actually figure out any other way of reducing it? Who do I need to influence? What processes do need to be studied, etc.? So it's a little bit about losing the details at some point in time. To become
Hmm.
strategic, you have to rise up to a level where you are not anymore thinking about the variance for this month is 2.2 per SU or whatever. You've got to lose that. You have to start thinking a little bit broadly, which is really lose the details. So I always say this as it's like looking at a mosaic. If you're too close to the mosaic, you cannot make out what it is. So you have to push yourself a little bit back, and then you see what is the picture that comes in front of you. Then you can move the pieces a little bit more and get it to a level that is sensible. So, back to the question related to strategic thinking, it is something that you would do, not as over and above your day job, but almost see it as a link between what you're doing versus what the organization is achieving. I was fortunate enough to start with Procter and Gamble, which had a very beautiful way of cascading it down, which is starting with the OGSM template, which is one of the best tools. I continued to use it through my entire career, all the way until the day I retired. But it is all about starting with the overall objective, the goal, and then cascading it to strategies and measurable outcomes, which each of those strategies then eventually become the objective for the team that report into you, and so on. So it's a lovely way of linking from top to bottom. The other way also is equally possible. When I was the CFO, one of the things that we used to do as a team is get the team together to actually build our OGSM for our department. So we'd say, what are the great ideas that you have, you think can change the way we are doing business or adding value? And we would put it together, prioritize it. Not everything would make it. So we'll work through it. So it's a lovely thing. I'm sure if people Google OGSM, they
I
will
was about to ask.
definitely, yeah, they will be able to find it. But if you need anything more, if you ever wanted to run a session on it, it's one of my most favorite tools ever. I think it really makes a big difference to thinking about strategies and linking it and actually seeing the outcomes.
Interesting. And I like how you're saying that you need to constantly move in and out, like zoom in and zoom out, because unless you zoom out, can't see the big picture. But then to make the impact, you then have to zoom in again. So that's an important one. And yeah, we'll look up OGSM. I don't even know what that stands for, but I'm curious. I'm going to look it up.
It stands for Objective Goals, Strategies and Measures,
Okay.
OGSM.
Okay, it
It,
sounds almost like how Google has OKRs and then PNG has OGSM. Yeah, I can imagine. But that makes a lot of sense. And then another parallel to this would be that what happens when, a middle manager could have this really brilliant strategic idea, at least in their minds it's brilliant, but then how do they convince leadership about the idea that they have? So, how do you think that could be done better by them?
first is to get your thought clearer.
Hmm.
And for me, the tool that I've always tried to use is to write things down in a very clear way, as to, again, starting with what is it that I'm trying to achieve? How would I go about it? How would I know that I've succeeded? What are my success measures, success criteria? Where is the risk? What resources do I need? And if it requires a lot of resources, is there a way I can smartly do it as a tiny pilot somehow and sneak it in and show some effect? So I do all of that thinking. And what I also realized through this process of clarifying for oneself are also make the whole proposal stronger, be prepared to meet questions if they came in like later, and it would also help me to do the sales pitch with
Hmm.
whoever is the leadership that I'm taking it to. I've also seen that if you have it too long, nobody has the time to read it, so it has to be concise enough without making it into like font 8. It has to be concise enough that it gets read, it gets interpreted. But it's after doing all of this also, it's quite possible that you go to your leadership or to your manager and say, this is a brilliant idea. And they tell you, what? We don't want to
Buy
do
it.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't buy it. So the approach, I mean, I've been in situations like this. So I've always found that asking why
Hmm.
really helps. It is a very simple thing, but just simply ask why, and they will tell you the reason why. Either it doesn't line up with the priorities for this year, or it is too resource intensive, distracting, or it is not something, the direction of the organization is planning to be changed or whatever. Or resources. It could be
Hmm.
like, I don't want you to focus on this for now. I would rather you do this other thing. So those are valid inputs. So don't take that too personally. Don't think that
Hmm.
it's my idea that's been rejected. Think about, is there a way that you can reposition it to still make it work? Okay,
Hmm.
listening to this. But if not, also it's no big deal. You say, okay, take one of the objectives or priorities that your leader has or your manager has, and turn that into something that you want to really go run with and make big. It doesn't always have to be this one particular thing, but you need to be convinced that the reason it's getting rejected is a good one, because otherwise it will build up resentment over time, and that's a bad thing.
Hmm. Understood. So I think what we're saying is one, the piece about get clarity, the success metrics, how will you do it? Maybe get the resource lined up or understand what will be needed. But then also try doing a small pilot so you can have like a proof of concept kind of a thing. But then if it gets rejected, also don't make it personal. Understand the reasons so that you can incorporate it as a learning for future, maybe, right?
Absolutely.
Makes complete sense, Srimati. And I think I'm going to link both the pieces we talked about here, which is developing that to zoom in, zoom out as often as needed. Don't just think of it as like, this is my task and get it done with. I'm going to ask you then, what would be the two or three ways you think that middle managers can actually build that strategic thought process?
Mhm. The biggest thing is it stems from how you define your role.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So don't define it too narrowly, too close to what your day to day work is. Pick one or two projects which are sufficiently distinct. Okay. So I always feel like it's for visibility, for growth, it's important that you take a bit of personal risk. So put up
Uh-huh.
your hand for tough projects, things that are outside your normal scope, right? Because that is the chance for you to actually learn something from scratch. Also, apply this concept of strategic thinking because it is distinct enough that it's a project by itself, right? And you can work on delivering results on a holistic basis, starting from what is the ideation all the way until execution, success, etc. So my actual recommendation to every middle manager, in fact, every single person in the organization, and that's a rule that I applied throughout, was at least 20 to 30% of your time, make sure that you are allocating to a specific project, and ideally something that is outside your scope of your regular day job, because then
Hmm.
you are also interacting with different people. It's broadening your thinking, you are diversifying your interactions and doubt, and like everything is making you a little bit uncomfortable, but because of that also leading to growth and forcing you to think beyond the
Hmm.
norm. And you also get more comfortable with ambiguity, which is an
Hmm.
important thing, right? Like, so project, pick a project, 20 to 30% of your time, keep that as the mantra. And if there is no project that is business related, pick a training project, do the
Hmm.
training of your subject matter with a completely different group. Try to
Hmm.
explain to them. Even that is a good way, because the questions that you get asked during that time opens your eyes, and then you get ideas from that. So always focus on either building the business or building the organization, but have at least 20-30% of project specific work.
That's great. That's great, Srimati. Because I'm also thinking that you're, in a sense, talking about how do you broaden your perspectives so that you start thinking at a different level than wherever you are. So that stretch project that you're talking about, that could lead to it because you speak and get interact with a totally different set of stakeholders, or when you train a totally different entity, then you get to understand how they see what you do, sort of a thing. So that's a great point that basically what we want is the broadening of horizon and perspectives. Okay, great. Now I'm going to change tracks a little bit, and I know we're very close to the wrap up time. So I want to ask you, in the light of what we are facing, and all organizations are facing disruption, whether it's AI linked or a lot of M&A happening. So, in the light of any of those organizational changes, something that middle managers get stuck on is around them, things feel very uncertain. Now they're stuck in the middle, which is that their leadership team is still figuring out things and their reports and their teams need answers. So, how do you recommend them striking a balance, and what are some of the things that they could do to still continue motivating the team to do the best they can?
This is a tough one because each disruption is not like the previous one, right? It's always something new that happens, right? So, the one thing every time I try to answer any of this, I always remind folks to think about their mindset, right?
Okay.
How are they viewing their role? If you think about yourself as being jammed as a middle manager between a front line and the senior leadership, it's not a very pleasant feeling. However, if you restate it and reframe it as a bridge, like you are the bridge that provides the solutions both ways. So, in some cases, you are the only way that the information related to the true worries and discomforts of your team is getting passed on to senior leaders. And the other way around, you are also transmitting what is realistically happening with the senior leadership. I'm reasonably sure that all of those managers are also under tremendous pressure, right? It's not as if that they're chilling in a beach and trying to take decisions very easily. So it's a tough one for them as well. So they are looking for support from their own people. So the example that I have on this one is one of really from my direct report during the time of COVID. She did such a fantastic job. I mean, we were looking at what is it that we needed to do to manage the situation, etc. And it was all about when do we get people back to the office, and it was a big deal. And she was the one who kind of transmitted that idea that no, my team is not really ready. They have young kids and they are really worried about this thing. They are not ready to come into work. They need this flexibility and it's important to them. We don't know about other people, but these few people are going to find it very difficult to actually show up.
Mm.
And because she took a stand and fairly firm, I was able to also support it. And I'm extremely thankful to her for bringing this up because we could have gone on and done something that would have really disengaged a lot of people. Now, this is the easier example. Now, when jobs are at stake, that's a tough one. So my advice to middle managers is always not to pass on your pessimism or your views. Remember that you are a leader yourself, and the shadow of leader is very, very important. If you take your pessimism, your negativity, or if you have heard rumors and pass that on, that's not really great. Stay as
Correct.
close to reality as possible. Don't be even overly optimistic if that's how you're feeling about the situation. Don't give false reassurances if you don't know. Kind of pass on the reality of things for sure. That's the mistake I see them many mid managers make during times of disruption because they're also under stress. So
Yeah.
sometimes they're like, you know what, I don't like the guy, so I'm going to say everything bad about. So stay away from that because you have a role to play in this one and think of yourself as the bridge and part of a solution as opposed to being jammed or being a postman just passing on information.
Such a good reframe. Bridge instead of a postman or a sandwich or being jammed for that matter. Great, Srimati. This was fantastic. I am going to ask you, if people were to take away one thing from our conversation today, what would you want them to take away?
For sure, be in your camp, right? Like constantly, you're the person rooting for yourself. So try and keep yourself as self aware as possible. Be true to yourself, be your authentic self, because that's the most fun place to be.
Awesome. Love that. And on that amazing, empowering note, thank you so much, Srimati, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Shruti. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Same here.